Welcome to The Longer Game, the only show that's dedicated to the future of retail. We bring on real-life people in the retail industry. We talk about their experiences, we share their stories, we apply it to what's currently going on in the market, and we look towards the future of retail. You could say it's Retail Reimagined. My name is Michael Marr. I run a customized, done-for-you service agency called Cartology that helps brands win on Amazon. Now, while my expertise stems in the Amazon field, we bring on a wide array of guests because retail is expansive. You've got e-commerce. Yes, you've got marketplaces like Amazon. You've also got brick and mortar that is evolving. You've got logistics. You've got technology, finance. There are so many aspects to retail, and it's complicated. So we're here to bring you the entire story. Do you think that you have an interesting story and you'd like to tell it on the podcast? Then go to thelongergame.com and fill out a form to be a guest on the show today. You can catch The Longer Game on any social channels: LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, YouTube, and our website, thelongergame.com. We've got all awesome guests on this show, so that I will promise. Are you ready to hear more about the future of retail? Let's get down to business. Welcome, everybody, to The Longer Game, the podcast where we talk about retail, we talk about brick and mortar, e-commerce, talk about all kinds of different stuff. And today I have someone on the show that's bridging some of those gaps. Andrew Faris is with me, founder of AJF Growth. Did I say that right?
Yeah.
AJF Growth. You're growing e-commerce brands. Tell us more about that, man. Welcome to the show.
Thank you. Yeah. Well, I appreciate you having me. Super fun to get to talk. I started in e-commerce 9 years ago, I think it is, the time we're recording this. And yeah, the journey has been a mix of brand and agency side. So I started as a media buyer on the brand side at a company called Qalo, QALO, which was sort of the first of the big silicone wedding ring companies, if you've seen those. And that company was like a wild ride. I was doing Facebook ads, working for Taylor Holiday there, who now runs Common Thread Collective, has been a friend and business partner and mentor to me along this whole pathway. So I've worked closely with Taylor for pretty much that whole 9 years.
I never knew how to say that brand name now, by the way, until you just told me. So
Qalo.
that's good. That's good.
Yeah,
to know,
we used to have a search ad that because people say Qualo all the time.
Okay.
So we had like a branded search ad that when you would type in Qualo, it was like, it's Qalo, not Qualo, but that's probably our fault. And that was our.
That's good. I love that.
Ad.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. It worked actually really well. And then, so I was there. That was a wild ride. That was like a 0 to 20 million in a year and a half with no outside funding.
Wow.
Just Facebook ads is just a money printer for that brand. And of course the margins were insane. It was like $20 a pop for a silicone wedding ring that, if you're watching this, I don't know if it'll be on YouTube, but
it will be.
It's a piece of rubber. So, it was a incredible journey to be on and to see kind of how that all worked out. Really, as the brand was trying to develop a sense of being a real lifestyle brand beyond just an individual product. So it got to be see large investments in things like the CrossFit Games, as well as, straight up media buying, performance marketing stuff. Went from there to Common Thread Collective, where Taylor had started the agency. Qalo just kind of became a client. He had sort of been the in-house VP of marketing, but then moved over because his agency started to grow. I moved with him pretty quickly, started taking on more clients, and learned quickly that it was not that easy as it was for Qalo with other brands. It was like, as I started working on 6 or 7 brands, it was like the mix of everything from brand struggles and brand challenges to, client personalities and all those things. Was all a whole new world for me. So stayed there. Eventually became the head of growth at Common Thread Collective and the head of strategy. And then CTC launched its own brands. And so that kind of took me back to the brand side via an aggregator called 4x400. At 4x400, at first I ran growth and then eventually became the CEO there. We had up to 6 brands in our portfolio at a time. One of them still exists. Actually, multiple of them still exist, but one of them is still in 4x400. They've sold off the others. And that brand is called Bamboo Earth. Bamboo Earth's a clean skincare brand. So I'm still close with those guys as well. Once the aggregator thesis got demolished and we put all the resources towards that one brand, which was an outsized opportunity relative to the others, I did not want to run a skincare brand. Great brand, I love it. In fact, there's a lot I think is awesome about it, and the founder's great, and all these things. But I didn't want to be doing that, and so kind of headed out of there and as that team reconfigured, and wasn't sure what I was going to do, and sort of had a couple freelance opportunities land in my lap. And now 2 years later, I am running AJF Growth, which is sort of my own small agency, slightly more than a freelance. I have one full-time employee and a couple of part-time and some overseas help and some of those things, but really not intending to grow it to be very big, at least today. Who knows what'll happen tomorrow? But today, the plan is I've got 5 ongoing clients, a couple folks that I do some coaching with on the side, and that's what I do. So all in the e-commerce space, really focusing on growing brands with Facebook ads, but with a view along the way to how do we think carefully about the financial elements of growth, thinking carefully about how we generate contribution margin in the business. What does it mean to grow an e-commerce business in every possible way? And because I've got sort of a mixed experience on both sides, I think while my best ability to execute for brands is on the Facebook ad side of things, that's the stuff that is like bread and butter for me. I think part of the service that I'm offering is things like forecasting and then strategic coaching and some of those things along the way as well, where I can help evaluate other opportunities in the business and sort of get folks cash flow statements in place and some of those kinds of things that maybe they don't see coming if they don't do that. Because I love along the way, what I've found is my sweet spot is like entrepreneurs trying to grow their business up from a couple $1,000,000. Like my favorite people to work with are people who are in the trenches. They're feeling the fun of seeing their business go from, early 7 figures. Now it's okay. They've got a real business. They're shipping their product out of their living room and doing everything themselves. Now they've hired a couple people. And then to try to get from there to like 10 million, 20 million, like that to me is so fun. Most entrepreneurs I've been around are awesome people who like really care about their product and their customer, and it's really fun to win for them. And so serving that client as well as possible, getting to clink glasses with them at those big moments, that's the stuff that's like super, super fun. So that's the journey.
It's a really cool journey. There's like 15 things in my head that I'm like, I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that. I want to talk about that.
Let's go. Let's do it.
There's a common thread, at least for me today. There's a guy who runs a small business here in my hometown that I mentor or coach. We'll meet, once a month and then talk every other week and just go through stuff. And the thing that we talked about today, because we met today, was you start a business because you enjoy a thing or you like a product or something like that. And then you think, I'm going to do this thing that I love. That's great. And then the business side of things kick in. You're like, oh, I have to run a business. That's a very different mentality than just, if it starts as a hobby, woodworking or something like that. Maybe it doesn't start like that, but maybe it's just, hey, I created this product. A lot of food brands start that way. I have a recipe. I want to turn it into something. And then it's like, oh, I have to turn this into an actual business that generates revenue, that also generates profit, that also has cash in the bank. All those things are very different. What's the biggest maybe thing that a brand owner could or business owner could correct early on that helps them to be successful? And this is coming from someone who, when I started my e-commerce business 13 years ago, because I did that for 6 years and then got into the agency side, I had no idea what a balance sheet was. I was like, why would you take money out here and put it out? That doesn't make any sense. What two entry accounting? So what's one of the things that you think, it doesn't have to be the thing, but what's one of the things that you think a business or brand owner could come in and say, hey, I need to tweak this thing in order for me to be more successful, or even just think about the business correctly?
I completely echo your initial comment there, which is that nobody gets into e-commerce because they love accounting.
Right.
And very few people, few people. There are some who like love the financial side of things, but very few people too. And so they don't see coming some of those challenges. And like, actually a lot of the service I think I provide for people is just saying like, hey, you actually can get from 2 million to 20 to 50 or whatever, but there's just some landmines along the way that you really don't want to step on. Let me point those out to you, because I've actually walked down this road a few times before and I know where they are. And so some of that stuff is like cash flow is like a classic challenge in e-commerce, that as you start scaling rapidly, unless you're like wildly profitable, you just don't realize that like buying your next larger round of inventory is going to make a bunch of cash go out the door and can create challenges in your business. Another thing people do a lot is they start expanding their team too fast. Taylor Holiday, who I've already referenced in this conversation a couple times, but his phrase for this I love, which is like business lifestyle bloat. Because people know the idea of lifestyle bloat when on the personal finance side, when people start making more money and they start buying nicer cars and all these kinds of things, and suddenly they're still living paycheck to paycheck, even though they're making 3 times the amount of money they were before, and it's because of lifestyle bloat, right? That same thing happens for businesses, where as they get to all the stuff they hated doing when they were doing it themselves at $2 million, they just hire it all out, and they do that sort of without a clear, set of KPIs and those things, because they've never managed a team before. They just end up adding all these costs, and so that creates another problem. But what I would actually say my answer to this question is really the thing that I think a brand can and should do in order to anticipate some of these things as best as possible is to have clarity to where profit will be created in their business. And that sounds really obvious, but I actually think you need to paper this out, and you need to be forecasting it, even if your forecast kind of sucks. Like, you just need to think about basically like, how am I going to create profit? Or I'm saying profit assuming that you're trying to be profitable. Some businesses are not at an early stage of business, but let's just assume that you're trying to be profitable, whatever. For that business, the notion of breaking up your P&L into 4 buckets. One of those is cost of delivered products. Basically everything goes into COGS, but in e-commerce that includes shipping, fulfillment, all those things.
Right.
Merchant account fees as well, right? Every time your credit card runs, it's 3% of your revenue that goes away. Like those sorts of things. All the variable costs associated with getting a product to a customer. So there's bucket number 1. Bucket number 2 would be advertising costs, so CAC basically. So there's another one. Bucket number 3 would be operating expenses outside of CAC. Sometimes people put CAC into operating expenses, but we'll call it SG&A, that kind of idea.
Okay.
And fixed costs in your business. So variable costs associated with the product, variable costs associated with advertising, fixed costs, all your labor and all that kind of stuff, right? And then bucket number 4 is profit. That's what's left over after those other 3 are there. You should have, in some way, some idea of how, roughly what percentages of your money go into each of those 4 buckets at each stage of growth. If you can do that, if you have some model for that, it will guide you to avoid a lot of mistakes and to make a lot of decisions well. Like, for example, if you realize that your business is going to double at your current pace, but you're not going to make any money, you're going to end up with the same bottom line as you had before. Like, if you realize that by starting to do some of that math, you will realize, oh, I'm spending too much on advertising, or, oh, I'm going to grow my team too fast, or whatever it is. And the simple way of thinking about those 4 buckets and trying to get a sense of that, I think gets you really, really far. So you have some kind of model for where that profitability is. And then, of course, you're going to miss your forecast. You're going to miss it low, or you're going to miss it high. Your forecast will never be right. It will never be right. That's not the point. The point is to have an idea of where you're trying to go, and then to make tweaks and adjustments along the way. And suddenly, you go negotiate with your manufacturer to take a little bit out of your COGS, or you go think about resetting your CAC target because you realize you're spending too much to acquire customers. And so now you got to tell your agency, hey, I told you $50 CAC. I actually need a $45 CAC, like whatever. Like, there's like a bunch of different things you could be looking at there. And the most common of those in D2C, and this is probably the tip within the tip here, is that I believe part of the thing that makes D2C a compelling business model that I think a lot of people didn't see coming, I certainly didn't, is that you can run a very, very, very lean business. So the example I think of a lot is the CEO of ButcherBox. I heard an interview with him where they were talking about being at $500 million in revenue, and they had I forget exactly how many employees. We could back this math out, but it was basically $3 million in revenue per head, which is like a massive number. It's a massive number in any business. And it's because e-commerce scales really, really, really well relative to not having a particularly large team.
16 people.
And no, that can't be.
Oh, right. No, that would be more 60, closer to. I was thinking 50, not 500.
Yeah, right.
150.
Yeah, right, exactly. So something like that.
But still, that's not a lot.
It's not
for
that
$500 million. No.
Correct. Yeah, and so that's an extreme version of it. Like most of us
I know
are
math.
$500 million businesses. Yeah. Most of us aren't running businesses that big, but the principle is really there, which is that you can run with a very lean OpEx. And so I would be targeting sub 15% of your revenue being in fixed costs in an e-commerce business, right? Versus, right, you're running an agency, me, I've got an agency. All of my costs are fixed costs.
All costs are fixed costs,
right? So so that's the thing. That's the sort of point within the point that I would make. So have some kind of a model of where profit's going to be in your business, even if it's fairly rough, and then specifically discipline yourself, plan to run your business really lean. There's actually a point within the point within the point, which is this, that you can also run your business really lean if you're remote, by tapping worldwide teams. And you can find incredible talent across the world. There's some challenges with this, but it can be drastically cheaper than building your team in the US, and your OpEx can get even smaller as a percentage of revenue, even if it's lean, and you can find incredibly highly talented people who are doing a great job. But I would be really thinking about that. How do I keep my OpEx really lean? That you can create a lot of profit in e-commerce business by doing that.
You keep creating so many layers, and I'm like,
I don't need. That was a terribly long answer.
No. It was a great answer, but I'm just like, oh my gosh, there's so much. I tell people we'll have them back for part 2. I haven't done that yet with anyone, but there's like a point 2 of point 3. Like there's a lot more. Part 2, part 3. There's a lot more that's in there. There's a couple of things that I think are interesting. One is, I told you earlier, before we started recording, that we implemented EOS after reading the book Traction. It just really spoke to me. And one of the biggest things that there's a lot that we got out of that. Team looks drastically different now than it did, 9 months ago when we initially started that. But one of the biggest things that I think is that a lot of business owners don't do is they bury their head in the sand. Like, I don't want to know what this costs. I don't want to know about this thing. I just want someone else to take care of it. I just want someone else to handle it. And when you actually talk about issues or problems, and this piece is twofold, but when you talk about it internally in your business, problems actually start to either get solved, or you realize how big of a problem something is and that's not getting solved. And then you either have to solve it or business doesn't continue to move forward. So it's a very clear delineation instead of saying, I'm just going to keep moving forward. So like talking about issues is a big one, but also client communication. If you're communicating with someone, if they have an idea, you talked about how you help people with forecast so they can see ahead. You tell someone, hey, you're going to run into traffic. Just to, tell your spouse, you're going to run into traffic on this. Okay. They're not going to be as angry when they hit it because they were expecting it.
Yeah.
That's a big change for someone. If you can at least anticipate, I'm going to have really strong headwinds right here, and that's okay. Probably a lot easier to stomach than just running in, smacking into the wall, and then falling flat on your face or back.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, and that's exactly right. That you just by having some idea of what's coming in front of you, you can just plan better for it to some degree. And I think there's no way really to totally internalize this without having gone through it, right? The experience is a really good teacher here. So getting great help is great, but there's some element here where you also have to like either be an incredibly high trust person who listens well to people around you, or you just have to go through it and feel the pain of cash flow sometime, but
both would even be
100%.
Better.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
I think one of the things that has been an advantage, sounds like to you, but I know also to me as well, is before I started an agency, which kind of was out of necessity because I had an e-commerce business that I grew for 6 years, and then it basically just crashed. I mean, there's really no other way to say that. It's just a part of my story, and I learned a lot in that first experience. But one of the biggest things that I was able to take from it is, I looking back, I realized kind of what happened. I had grown on marketplaces, so started on eBay, went to Amazon, had my own site. I had a couple brands. Most of them didn't succeed. One was I would say mildly successful. It is at the tail end of my business and just cash dried up, and I had no revenue, then cash, and I was like, I can't keep moving forward. But it turned out that what happened to me, I was able to analyze, and I realized when I started to serve clients, I was like, okay, I've got the skill set. I need to turn it into something. That's when I started doing freelance, and then it turned into building an agency. I didn't set out to start an agency. It just kind of happened because I was like, there's more work, there's opportunity. How do I work this out? And there's a bunch of iterations that we've gone through, but I was able to go into other people's businesses and say, I know exactly what's happening right here, and here's how we solve this, and here's how we fix this. And I think it did two things. One, it gave me a sense of extreme ownership that was like, I felt this pain, and I don't want you to have to feel that same pain. But also, how do I nuance that conversation? Because someone who's doing almost $1 million organically, you tell them they're gonna have to now spend 10% on advertising when they're not used to doing that, but it's gonna save their business. It's not gonna feel very good, but it means that they don't go out of business. Like, how do you stomach that? And then besides just helping me take an extreme sense of ownership, I was able to, relate to what they were going through, and maybe even be a little bit empathetic to that situation. Because it's owning a business is it's tough, man. You get a lot of stuff thrown at you. It's not all roses. I think it's starting to fade, I think, a little bit, but there's definitely I have a friend who coined the term entrepreneur porn. It's the cars, the boats, whatever. I mean, anything you could think of with the biggest entrepreneurs in the U.S. I mean, Elon Musk is a big one that I'm sure people think about, but that's not the reality for most businesses. One, don't get super big like that, and two, you're just seeing the facade. You have no idea what's going on internally with that person.
Yeah, I have noticed that on my podcast, for example, whenever I have a title of an episode that is referencing a large revenue number that someone has done, I get a bunch more downloads than others. Even though, and I think part of that's really natural, right? People want to hear success stories and go okay, how'd they do that? That's why they are tuning in, right? They want to learn, and so people who have some demonstrable, measurable form of success, which is what a revenue number can be. It's not always, but it can be. That's somebody maybe they want to listen to or whatever. But I've also wondered if it's something like that. If there's just sort of there's this undercurrent in the e-commerce world that is, e-commerce doesn't put up the kind of valuations and numbers that SaaS companies do and true tech companies do. And yet there's something similar, I think, maybe at a different scale and maybe in almost a different way, where there seems to be an undercurrent at times of this clamoring for this deep drive that people have for validation and success, and they just want to get to that point where that business is just crushing. Yeah. And sometimes I can't even tell what's motivating that. I don't think it's even always financial. Part of it, I think, is just sort of the human tendency to self-justify and to pat ourselves on the back and feel good. That is the desire to be a success, maybe even more desirable to people than being successful per se. You know what I'm saying? It's something about people's existential sense of self. But so the entrepreneur porn thing, I think that you're saying really makes sense to me. I think people do that. As it turns out, I think for me at least, having some things go badly have been as valuable to me as some of the things that have been successful, and they've both been valuable, right? So it's not just, it would be too much to say, the failures are the things that teach you. You don't learn anything from success. That's just wrong. I've learned a lot of stuff from success,
What have you learned from success? Or maybe we get to that, but I'm just curious about what you would say there.
Well, I'll just finish the thought. I did a podcast episode with Taylor Holiday, sort of a collab with his podcast, the Ecommerce Playbook, which was initially founded when I was at 4x400, and was sort of documenting, trying to do sort of a build in public, document the journey kind of thing. We were really honest about our numbers. But now it's the Common Thread Collective podcast. Really good. Really, really good e-commerce podcast. If you're growing a brand, you should go listen to Taylor. And Richard Gaffin, his co-host. But Taylor and I did an episode about sort of just specifically about failures and sort of what we had learned from them. I just sent you the link. Some of you can throw it in the show notes. But it was a really helpful sort of episode for me to even think through and work through, because at 4x400, we had this hypothesis that we were going to add all these brands and build this big thing, and it was going to be awesome, and we're going to go $500 million or whatever. And it was just wrong. We were just wrong, and it got us into really tight cash spaces from acquiring brands, and we handled capitalization of the business poorly. We handled so many things, and a lot of those were on me because I was the one who ended up being in the CEO chair. And gosh, I mean, now there was hard and stressful for a while, but now I would not trade that back professionally, because I just learned so much. And actually doing it with a group of people who were supportive and encouraging and sort of never gave up on me and never made it a moment to sort of be condescending to me or something like that made it also so I could sort of learn the most from it. They were really great teammates in that. And so anyway, the lessons from both of those sides of things have been incredibly valuable to me. And so, I just really agree with your point. It can be really, there's a lot of shiny object in front of you with some of the boats and cars that you see and the revenue numbers along with that. And then at the same time, the lessons from the misses are really, really important.
I love The Office, and so anytime I can find a chance to relate back to that, I do. And you said something about, getting a revenue number. It could be what you're after, but it could just be a reflection of something a lot deeper, which could be insecurity, could be validation from a person that revenue helps you to get. And my Office reference is when Andy goes out and is selling his family's boat, and the guy in the, oh no, it's not on the boat. Someone's in the office and someone says something. Oh, I think it's Robert California when he comes in and he says, "All right, whatever, Dad." And he's like, "Oh, okay, never mind." And he backs up. It's like the stuff that I'm not a psychologist, or a psychiatrist or anything medical, but years of like up to the 7-year mark as a kid are very, very formidable. And so anything that happens during that time can be very positive or it could be very detrimental to a kid that grows up and becomes an adult. You've got 2 young ones, so you know that you're in a very specific time. I have a 10-year-old, and that's still really important. But I think about that, what are the things that I could have done differently that would have better impacted her as she gets older. But that stuff goes back way, way further. And so if all you're chasing after is potentially a revenue number or self-validation, even if you get there, is it like, did you really reach your goal? Did you really get what you wanted? I think the answer is probably no.
Yeah. A lot of times it's not. And this is what I've heard from, I've also done a couple episodes with people who have had exits and just sort of talked through life after the exit, and just and I've talked with a few people and heard this story repeated a lot of times. I saw, I've just seen this story a lot where it's like after the exit, it's not necessarily regret. It's people are happy with the decision they made or whatever. It's just this feeling of, did they actually, did it deliver on the promise, And I've definitely heard stories of people who have like a massive exit and then are just kind of miserable afterwards because, one of the nice things about having that goal to chase is it's like sort of a reason to wake up. And if you don't have some other reason to wake up, then it's really challenging when that gets taken away, So, I think it's a real thing that there's deeper down reasons why people are chasing these things a lot of times than what it appears on the surface. It's not maybe just a revenue number. In fact, people don't really want money. They want joy, I think, and money they think of as a path to joy. And sometimes, there's ways in which it, demonstrably delivers on that to some degree, but then there's also a way in which it keeps you coming back for more.
Money is really interesting, and it's a tool that I just think sometimes people know how to use well and sometimes they don't. Yep. And there's been a lot of cliche things in my head that I could think to say, but one of them, if we're talking about money, is people say, money can't buy happiness. And while there's truth to that, it can buy you a lot of things that might bring you joy. So I feel like you'd be remiss to say, oh, money can't buy happiness, and it can't truly give you joy, because I do think that there's a difference between joy and happiness. People that chase happy, that's a momentary thing, but joy is, hey, I'm feeling sustained even in the difficult times. I have joy because I'm happy to be alive. I have a challenge that's in front of me. Maybe I can recognize and show gratitude for the things that I do have. And so that joy is a very different feeling than happiness. But money can help. Money can help you to buy things that you need, or maybe you live a little bit more comfortable lifestyle. You can go and travel and do things. But there's also a problem with money in that it can bring out the worst in people. So if you aren't self-validated, or you have, purpose beyond just chasing a thing, or you are not responsible with money or with people, and you get a lot of money, it can cause you to take advantage of those people. And the thing is not the money. The money is the tool. People say, money is the root of all evil. If we're actually technically quoting the Bible, that's not what it says. It says love of money is the root of all evil. You can't serve two masters. Yeah. So if you serve money, you can't serve something else. That's the problem, is when you love money so much that you're willing to give up everything else for the money, and it's not going to fulfill you.
Yeah. And I think there's a distinction to be made between people who have very little money and get to subsistence, and to a sustainable life where they're not worried about money all the time, and then the move from that up to wealth, and then from there to super wealth, basically. And sort of money's ability to deliver joy as a return on investment, so to speak, right? Like if you think about that, like it seems to me that there is a meaningful impact on helping people get from worrying about money because they just do not have enough to
Yep.
like to being okay. I think that's demonstrated in a fair amount of literature that like essentially like that anxiety that having very little produces is not something that we should fetishize in any way. The notion of like the happy poor person or whatever, it's like it's actually really hard, and so there's that. But then yeah, I think it's the continuing chase for it for more and more levels forever that I think is where people get really in a hamster wheel where it doesn't give quite the return they want. So when the return that they're looking for on money is lack of worry because they just have enough to live, that it actually does pretty well at that so far as I can tell. Of course, there's exceptions to that, but yeah. But when it's deep soul joy, when you're looking for that based on your accomplishments and your success, I'm not sure it can give you that.
I think the thing that when you take away the money, like you said, you don't want to fetishize the poor happy person, but when you take away the money, and why I think people learn from failure is now the thing that you were chasing or you're wanting to go is not there. You don't have that thing to focus on, so you have to either get really miserable or look internally and say, all right, what am I really about? What am I here for? Are there ways that I can find to be thankful in this situation, or am I just going to be miserable? So I think when you do remove that, that's when you see things like failure, or maybe someone who doesn't have as much means, they aren't as attached to those things. And so they have to think a little bit more about themselves as a person. But you said that success has taught you stuff. What are some things that success has taught you?
Yeah, it's taught me where the landmines are on that road, right? Like by not stepping on them, you're able to look back and point them out and go, oh, if that, and also just like sort of to just torture this analogy here, it sort of shows you where the road is in the first place and where it's leading to. It's really hard to know how to successfully operate a 5, 10, 20, $50 million business without having done it and seen it. And so seeing it done well, you can sort of watch some of these things happen. So like in e-commerce, for example, there's a couple things that I've now come to think of as sort of core. I was on a coaching call today with a guy who's an awesome guy, started a really cool brand, but he has sort of a fundamental business problem, which is that he really has one product, and the product is low LTV. Very low LTV. In fact, like his AOV basically is his LTV. Like once you've bought it once, it's well made. It's single use thing. You just really don't need to buy more.
You're delivering well that you don't ever have to deliver again on the promise.
That's right. Yeah. And he shouldn't try and change that and create some planned obsolescence thing. Like it's like just what the product, the category, all those things. It's not a consumable product, any of those things. And so, he was trying to figure out what was happening with some decline in his business. And it's because his business is entirely built on his ability to put that product in front of people one time, get them to buy while maintaining margin for himself. His CAC just has to stay at a level that supports whatever his OPEX is and whatever his variable cost related to delivering the product is, his cost of delivery. So, and there has to be profit left over because that's the whole business. And you could say all kinds of things. Oh, your advertising should be better and your organic should be better, and if you're really building a brand, whatever. But it's all like a lot of that stuff just is not very helpful. Like the reality is the business fundamentally has a core issue, which is that there is one basic product. It's really hard to layer another product onto the business. People are just like, oh, just develop more products and sell them to them. Well, sure, that would be great, but it is not that easy. And so when you sort of play that out, then I can look at him on the call and say, here is what is in front of you, which is like the businesses that get to the level that you're trying to get to have this fundamental makeup of their business, this sort of genetic components of their business that are just different than your business in relation to product and customer. And now the success of some businesses has taught me what that is, right? Like high margin, high LTV makes for a much better e-commerce business than others. And low OPEX, that's another thing I've seen that I referenced earlier, makes for a much better e-commerce business than others. Understanding what a Facebook ads account looks like at a $500,000 a month spend versus a $100,000 a month spend, seeing those kinds of things really, and what the operational setup you need to support that level of spend is, it's not as simple as just having somebody throw some ads in the ad account anymore. Like, so yeah, like all, there's a lot of things like that you could sort of reference. managing cash and thinking about financing and some of those things, cash conversion cycles, all of those things are in there. And having seen some of those, a bunch of those things I just name checked and referenced, seeing those done well has taught me what it looks like to do them well. And then I can reflect and compare that to my experience and go like, oh, here's what I totally missed when I acquired Genuine Canine, a dog collar brand that I acquired when I was a CEO for Y400. And now I would never acquire that brand, not because the product wasn't good, it was good, but because it was always going to be limited in its potential to scale because of some elements of what the product is and isn't, and there you go.
And it just wouldn't help you reach the goal that you'd set forward for that.
Yeah, it just was a waste of time because it just wasn't ever going to be big enough and good enough, and without the kind of investment that we wouldn't have wanted to make. There's just no way. There wasn't enough LTV. There wasn't enough margin.
I think we talked about, I'm running a small agency, you're running a small agency. I think that there's a lot of beauty in the small side of things because it is less complicated. Maybe it's not as much money, but if you can really running lean, I would say is becoming the theme for me this year for sure. I think we were definitely bloated at the beginning of the year, and one of the I think best pieces of advice I've gotten is hiring someone is the most expensive solution to anything.
Yeah.
Like, do we need to perform this service? Can I do this? Is there a way to automate this thing? Is there a way to just better organize it so it makes a lot more sense instead of just hiring a person to do that stuff? Sometimes the answer is hiring a person. You just have to know what that cost is. But it's not being so big can have its benefits. And I think the complexity, you probably know better than anyone, but the complexity as revenue goes higher increases a lot more. I don't know if I'd say exponentially, but there's just
a ton,
different problems.
Yeah. The way I've heard people talk about this with team growth, the analogy I really like is that as teams grow, it becomes like playing different sports. So when your team is small, it's like playing golf. When you're playing golf, everybody gets to it's 4 buddies and they're all watching everybody's shot and they all stop and look at each other, and they're all kind of playing their own game alongside each other, making their own choices, picking their own clubs, etc. And it's really fun, and there you go.
And you can drink while you're doing it.
That's right. That's super fun. Yeah.
Let's go.
If that's not true of e-commerce,
I don't know what is.
Yeah. So and then golf becomes basketball. So as you get to basketball is 12 players on a team. There begins to be some specialization. You have plays that you have to run, and you have some sense of that, but there's also still a lot of improv as you move up and down the court. There's a little more sense of this guy's a shooter, this guy's a defender, this guy's a post player or whatever. But and there are playbooks, like I said, but the play can fall apart, and there's a lot of improv, and everybody can just make things happen in real time by talking to each other and yelling, "Send me the ball," or running to an open spot on the court or whatever. Right? There's a lot of that kind of stuff. As that happens, everybody still knows each other. Everybody's still friends. It's still pretty tight knit, but maybe guy number 1 and guy number 12 aren't as close as guy number 1 and guy number 3 or whatever it is, right? Then it becomes football. And at some point,
I was waiting for this piece.
Right, now you've got 60 people on the team. The kicker may never have had a conversation with the defensive tackle and does not have anything to do with him. And at this point, it's on every play, on every snap, 11 guys on offense have to know where they are going independent of one another, and they cannot improv very much because you have so little time to make a decision. So that means you have to memorize the playbook, and you have to decide, like, the quarterback needs to know that the receiver is going to go 10 and out or whatever, and that way he's going to be there when he throws it, and you have to memorize. Now you have a thick playbook where part of your job as a team member is to study it and to do that. And that move from more improvisation and more being in each other's thing, in each other's business, and more friendship potentially. You may not always love the guy you're golfing with, but
sure,
you probably like at least one of them. Like to go from there to massive more specialization. Basically the gap between those two things is process and plays. It's having things, documentation. It's having things written down to do that. That's what actually makes the team be able to scale. And man alive, is that a different skill set than the entrepreneurial skill set? Like I just think like the person who starts the business is rarely the person who wants to live in all the documentation and process building. This is why COOs exist, right? So yeah, I think that's the challenge. Whether it's an agency or a e-commerce brand, like that part of the journey is really tough.
I have a friend who, by the way, thinking of the football analogy, like just like you said, you have to be in a certain spot at a certain time. You're going and doing your thing, and you've got this pressure coming on you that sometimes is not. I love a good analogy. So the pressure comes at you. Sometimes you don't know what's coming at you, and you have to make an even quicker decision. But if the person's not where they said they're going to be, then it puts you in a lot of trouble.
Yep.
A buddy of mine does not like the talk about process. And I actually got a text today that said, there's someone posting about how you have to have documentation and process. And it was like, his argument is you put really high level people in a position that are really talented. And that's what really is the game changer.
How big of a team is he on?
That's a good question. Maybe, I don't know, maybe 20, 30. It's not super, super, super large.
Yeah. What kind of business?
It's an e-commerce business.
Okay.
But that's also his mentality too. And as an owner of something, my response to that, I'm going to text him this later, is I disagree that it's just about that individual person. Part of the reason there is a process, you're not going to be able to get every single thing at a specific level. You're not going to be able to get every single thing down. But if you can say, here's the way we do this thing, there's at least a little bit more consistency. And then when something does go wrong, you're able to point to, okay, well, like, did you do these 3 steps? I did 1 and 3. I didn't do 2. Okay, well, that was the problem, was that 2. I mean, I'm oversimplifying, but you at least have some kind of standard that you can go to. It doesn't mean that you can't apply your knowledge, but there's at least something to work from.
Yeah. I mean, I'm mixed on this point. Like, I would just say you don't have to choose. Like, you can hire talented people, but then you will make them better by having clear goals, clear process, etc. And the more, typically, like the lower level employee that you have, the more instruction you're going to need to give them.
Yep.
And part of the job of an executive is to plan and to build process so that those people can all thrive, right? It's to get out of the work and to instead get into to sort of building that plan. Now, like, this is also where there's a distinction between individual contributors and managers, and I think that is a helpful thought, that like some people are going to be much better oriented towards being an individual contributor at a high level. Like, you can imagine an e-commerce business, somebody running your ads is, even at a very high level, paid a lot of money, is still in the execution of it, because so many hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars are going into your ad account, that it's like worth having somebody who's much more of an individual contributor, like actually being the one running your ad account. You know, you don't have to pass that off, because it's 25 to 40% of your entire revenue is going into that. And so you want to make sure it's somebody really close to that and who's actually in the work and all those kinds of things. And somebody else maybe is building processes around getting the creative over to them or whatever it is. But like, you know, there's all kinds of examples that could be something like that. But yeah, I just think it's just sort of a mix. I think there's, you know, and I would say 20 to 30 people is right in between basketball and football. You know, it's like, it's when you get to 50 or 60, you just have to have documentation, you know, if you get there, if, you know. And for me, at least, like, one of the implications of all this is that, like, part of the reason I'm not trying to grow a big, huge thing myself is, first of all, I don't want to spend all my time on process, even though I've actually had to do a decent amount for having, like, essentially 5 touch points in my business.
Yep.
And also because I really like the small team. I don't really want to deal with management stuff in quite the same way. I think it's fun to be closer with people. Like, I like it. And so, you know, there's a preference there. And I think I've definitely talked to people who've grown big businesses and had a lot more success, and also who had the most fun they've ever had when there were 4 people in the business, you know. So now, trade-offs, life stage, all kinds of things like that. But
it's important to know what you actually enjoy too, and not just tell yourself, I'm chasing this
better
number
get bigger. Yeah.
It's better to get bigger. Yeah. Exactly. Where this has been incredible, and I'm gonna have to type up show notes after this. It's gonna take me a lot longer because I got a lot to do. But I thank you for that.
Fast.
No, that's good. I love it. I'm very similar. I have to silence myself in the same way that I do in a sales call, because I have a tendency to go. But I think it's been a lot of great information, and there was a crossover in CrossFit. Pop punk bands, maybe that's something we didn't even get to like on that. Here. But if people want to know more about you or find out more about you, where should they look? Playing golf with your buddies? Playing basketball? Yeah, tell people where
there.
Okay.
I have a buddy asked me once before I was going to play golf with him. He said, like, "Are you bad or are you embarrassing?" And I said, and that's a good distinction because pretty much everybody's bad at golf.
I'm embarrassing.
I'm embarrassed. I said, I think I'm bad, and then we played, and that was embarrassing. So that was one of the last times I played. So. I'm not good. But the best place, I think there's probably 2 best places if you like my content or want to go hear more of what I would have to say, one of them would be the Andrew Faris podcast, creatively titled. You can find that at ajfgrowth.com/podcast. So that's my web. Everything that I do is connected in some way to my site, ajfgrowth.com, but ajfgrowth.com/podcast. You can find me there. There's a few episodes there that I think people would like. There's one, my most popular episode ever is called Opening the Books. And so that episode is like a live recorded coaching call, Opening the Books with Mixed by Nazrin. It's a live recorded coaching call where I talk to an entrepreneur who's right around about to be $2 million run rate in her business. And so we just took 2 hours and basically recorded, like, here's exactly what I would do next for you. And then you can get follow up with every document that I referenced there and all those things. So if you are interested in sort of growing e-commerce brands and in the nitty gritty of how I would coach somebody at that stage, well, that's exactly what we did. This gal Nazrin, who's since now has actually become my final client, my newest and final client. And that was not even originally the point. It's just worked out that way. But Nazrin, was really gracious to like share really honestly with her business. So it's like her real ad account, her real numbers, everything.
Wow,
really
yeah.
Cool. So that episode is I think cool. That's a good one for YouTube because there's a lot of screen shares and things like that. So you can check that out. The other one, the other thing is just Twitter. I'm active on Twitter, at Andrew J. Faris, and I'm there. So DM me, email me, whatever.
That's where I found you. So
yeah,
and you were quite responsive. Well. Thanks for coming on. To everyone listening there, I think there's a lot that you can get from here. If you want to find out more about what Andrew's doing, we'll have stuff in the show notes. You can go find him on Twitter, listen to his podcast, and get out there and go and execute and be very clear about what it is that you want, because you might end up chasing something that you don't really want and doesn't really bring you joy. But that's it, everyone. We're done. We're out. See you later. All right, that was the show. What did you think? That was the longer game. We would love for you to share the show with other people and to leave us a review of the show. So go to iTunes, go to Spotify, you can go to YouTube, comment, leave a review, and share this on any social channels that you are active on and wherever you have influence. We want to share this story and stories like it to as many people as possible. Do you have a compelling story and do you want to come on the podcast and talk about it, and you're in the retail industry, then go to thelongergame.com, fill out a form, and we will contact you about coming on the show. You can find us on any social channels, Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, Twitter, and you can go to our website, thelongergame.com, to actually read all of these episodes in blog form in text, because we know not everyone's going to listen. This podcast is brought to you by my agency, Cartology. We are a customized, done-for-you service agency that helps brands win on Amazon. It is super complex selling on the Amazon Marketplace. We help simplify that for you. This podcast is also brought to you by Podcastify Me. They are a full-service podcast production company that designs podcasts around people who are paid for their advice. That is coaches. If you want someone to help create, strategize, and distribute your podcast to the masses, go to podcastify.me to find out more. I've so enjoyed that you've been a part of the conversation and that you've given up your time to hear these people's stories. We'd love for you to share. If you want to find out more, just go to thelongergame.com. Hope you have a great rest of your day. Stay blessed. And until next time, cheers.